All right, everyone, come on in. We're getting ready to start. We'll wait for just a moment while we get everyone to come on over. All right, we still got a few. We'll wait for one moment, Congressman, if that's okay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I can't believe it. The second week of school, you got pizza from the pie and Congressman Owens. I'm not sure what could be better in this particular day for these students, Congressman. No, it's you. It's you. Congressman Owens has been a great friend of not just mine, but of the University of Utah for quite some time. We're thrilled he's willing to come and speak to us today. We're also very grateful for this great partnership with the Sutherland Institute that helps bring us together. This today has been, we've been meeting with members of our congressional delegation for the past couple of weeks, and we've really enjoyed not just that partnership, but the conversations that we have been having. So today, Congressman Owens has agreed he's going to give us some. You're going to talk to us for a moment, and then we'll have some time for some question and answer as well. And then after the speech and questions, a panel discussion. Derek and Mallory will lead a panel discussion here at the very front from some of the topics we will have talked about today. It's going to be time well spent. So go ahead and stay. You're all full and ready. So just stay and enjoy the conversation today. We're so glad to have you with us, as always. Let's give a hand, Congressman Owens.
Thank you. Thank you so much, buddy. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I go back to my first exposure to the Sutherland Institute. It was actually just as I was beginning to decide to run for office, which is something I was saying when I was much younger I would never ever do. And out of that interaction, ended up meeting my deputy district director there. You guys see him later on, Alex. But let me just say before we get started with my talk, I like to thank those, particularly the older folks, law enforcement, those who keep a structure here in Utah, not only in college, but across the board. Thank you. Thank you so much for what you've done to hold on to a culture that's really unique. I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. At the time, the days of KKK, Jim Crow segregation, and we had the same, believe it or not, the same type of environment. We had an environment that was based on 4 very basic tenets, and from that, the tenets were faith, family, free market, education. And as a young man, we were taught to respect, and I just loved it. My dad was a World War II vet. We were taught respect of our elders. I was taught very basic tenets that I found here in Utah: with love of God, country, family, respect for women and authority. And it really helped to kind of set the stage for me of how to make sure I'm disciplining myself, how I envision my future, things I want to get done, and the respect that I like to have in a name that you work very hard an entire lifetime to get. So, oh my goodness, I see some of my buddies here. Good to see you, buddy. And just know this, as I begin this process, this is such an important phase of your life. It's not just the education, the actual courses you're going through. It's the habits you'll develop in terms of how you interact with other people. It's so very important. And my dad was a college educator for 40 years. What I loved about our conversations is that we always said, he appreciated more my debate ability, my ability to articulate myself, as opposed to whether I agreed with him or not. And from that, we kind of had this culture of let's respectfully agree to disagree. That's the way I grew up. And I'll say this, the more you are confident about who you are, and that's a self-esteem thing. I'm not talking about how well you can add or subtract or read. How confident are you with who you are? Because if you are very confident in the way you think, your ability to articulate the way you think, you can give people space. You're able to give people room to be different, to disagree, because you know if you're nice, you're respectful, at some point, your view will play out. You'll be able to bring that person over to your side. And if everybody's thinking that way, imagine how much our conversation would change as opposed to what we're doing right now. So I just want to say that this is a very important time. I've had a chance to talk, where's Maddie? I had a chance to talk to Maddie, and our conversations, I thought I'd like to share that with you, because these 4 years, or whatever amount of time here, is very, very special. So take advantage of it. Take advantage of those good people skill habits that you can learn here because of the diversity here. You take out there in the real world, I tell you what, people will respect that in a big way. Folks respect respect. They respect discipline. They respect being nice. Those kind of things are very, very important. So we might have some very passionate views that might be different, but even those passionate views can be talked about in a different way. So I want to make that point, and I want the adults in the room to thank you and your parents and your grandparents, because what we have here is not by accident. It's a culture that's been fought for very hard to be passed down from one generation to the next. And it's going to be up to this generation to understand what that looks like, why we're such a unique state, why we're the fastest growing state in the union. It's because people visit here and they feel something about this remarkable culture. They say, you know, I think I can do this. And you know, I've been in Congress now for a year, for one tenure and a half, what's the word I'm looking for? Term, thank you. That word was not coming, it was not coming. So 1 term and a half. And I tell all my colleagues that come and visit Utah, I say, listen, just know this up front. You come to Utah too often, you stay too long, you'll become a Utahn. Right, Maddie? All right. So it's just know that, and I want to thank you guys for that. So I'm going to give you just some thoughts I have that we prepared earlier just to share with you. Just know that the first tenets that I'm going to talk about here is exactly what I grew up in Tallahassee. So I feel very, very proud to be part of a culture that still has it, because it's very, very difficult to hold on to. Okay, family values, pro-free market policies, quality education, and the visionary leadership has made Utah the best place to raise a family, start a business, and achieve the American dream. In a recent U.S. and World Report Best State Rankings, Utah was ranked first in the nation in its economy and fiscal stability, fourth in infrastructure, and fifth in education. Just so you know, my committees I'm part of is transportation infrastructure, and I'm the subcommittee for education and workforce. Our goal is make sure, our legacy is make sure that we're number 1, not number 4 and 5th, but number 1, infrastructure, and number 1 in education. We can do that. In Congress, my priorities include ensuring all Utahns have access to quality education to succeed in the classroom, workforce, workplace, and today's economy. As the chair of the Higher Education and Workforce Development Subcommittee, I'm proud to spearhead innovative legislation to ensure world-class education to all Americans. The current federal student loan process is cumbersome, confusing, and lacks transparency. In Congress, I've introduced the Federal Assistance to Initiate Repayment, FAIR Act, which takes a critical step toward addressing the failures of the student loan program by providing fair, responsible path back to repayment for 40 million borrowers. The FAIR Act specifically will simplify and streamline the student loan repayment process, provide targeted financial assistance to those unable to repay their loans, tackle the predatory loan practices, and that's going to be big. I think we have to look at a system in which we have institutions that are paid right up front, full 100%, and then the students have to figure out how to succeed as we go through. There should be some skin in the game. There should be some accountability, some metrics of success. We're in a free market where the product is always, we have to decide if it's worth the price, if it's convenient for us, if it gives us a better feeling, and the product for our country right now are you guys. You guys are really what makes our country tick, and if you're a good product, we're going to have a really great future. So that's our goal, and make sure that getting into debt that you can't get out is not part of the equation. Moreover, I am fighting to expand eligibility for the Pell Grant to include high-quality, short-term, online higher education programs so that every American has a pathway to success. Traditional higher education programs can seem daunting to those who do not follow the conventional educational path. For example, students aged 22 and older who work at least part-time, are paying for school independently, or have a limited discretionary budget are getting left behind by this traditional model. Learners from low-income backgrounds and veterans often juggle multiple life responsibilities and do not have control of their work schedules. For these individuals, online programs are their only way, the only access to education and training. Expanding the Pell Grant for these programs will empower students to pursue affordable and flexible academic options to help them succeed. I've also introduced the Mining School Act, a bipartisan legislation to increase and improve opportunities for American university and college mining and geological programs to prepare our students to meet the future needs, energy needs. The career and technical education is the driving force behind America's economic growth. And this is an area we have to really look at. You're going to hear a lot about rare earth minerals, the fact of how important they are for our future, for technology. Well, in America, we have 600 men and women graduating from the mining schools. China, there's 1.5 million per year. So they seem to have it right. And we have so many young people that would, if they understood this profession, if they understood what it was, and that's where their focus and their passion was, the things we could do in terms of innovation would be remarkable. And also, by the way, there's a lot of money involved in some of these programs that right now that you'll be hearing about in time. That's why I supported the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act, bipartisan legislation to allow Americans to use 529 education savings accounts for skills training, credentialing, and certification programs. Current law only permits workers and families to use the 529 savings accounts to pay for college, universities, and vocational school expenses. It should be about choice. A recent University of Utah study projected the Beehive State's population will grow by 66% by 2060. To meet the demands of our growing economy and population, Utah needs a robust investment in essential transportation infrastructure to solve the traffic congestion, housing shortages, and rural transit challenges. Utah is also in the midst of a record drought. Top-of-the-line water conservation and management facilities are vital for preserving our precious water supplies. As the first Utahn to serve on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committees over the last 2 decades, I'm proud to advocate for the infrastructure needs. This year, I secured $60 million from the United States Department of Transportation to fund a critical infrastructure project to provide 25 plus years of additional system life for the Utah transit system. I also joined with my Utah Congressional delegation to introduce a Salt Lake City Stewardship Act to allocate financial resources for drought mitigation, to employ more innovative solutions, and to replenish the water supplies and levels of the Salt Lake City. To say the least, it's been an honor of a lifetime. And again, as you go through this process, go out to look for your life passion in terms of income, have your families and your children, you'll kind of understand what I now understand. I have 6 of my children and 16 grandkids here are Utahns, so I'm all in. And at the end of the day, as we take that next step for that responsibility with family, you'll find that really is your next generation is everything. Everything you do, everything you sacrifice. I continue to talk about my law enforcement friends because you think about what they run toward, the issues that we run away from, is because they too see the vision for their kids living in a place of freedom, opportunity, and you will do the same. Once you find what that passion is for you, whatever it is, it will link in at some point to how your kids will benefit from it as you succeed with that. So I know we're going to have some Q&A, some questions. I just want to say once again, this is such a nice event. It's a sweet spot. Any seniors in here already? You have any seniors? Isn't it amazing how fast it went? I mean, you get it? All of high school was to get to this point of going to college, and here we go, just like that, it's over. That's the way life goes, by the way. So take advantage of every piece of it. Be an optimist. Be a person who understands that this country is the greatest country in the history of mankind that gives you a chance to start all over again. You can fall flat on your face because of a place that gives you the opportunity to learn the lessons from it, to learn something called grit, to actually get the respect of people as they see you standing back up again, and then you look back on your lifetime and say, it was all worth it because I did the best with what I was given. This is our country. There's nothing like it in the world today. So I'm hoping that you lean in hard to take advantage of the opportunities you have here and be an uplifter for other people. Let me just say this. I'm thinking of this, and it's not something I was planning on talking about, but it's so important, I think, for this crowd. For those who don't know, I played NFL for 10 years. Matter of fact, I played with the Raiders when they used to win football games. I know that's kind of strange for the young people, but those with gray hair, they get it. There was a time the Raiders were winning all the time. Came out of that to do something that I thought was going to be my life mission, to start a business so that I can have impact on that community I grew up in that I saw was losing it. The community I grew up in the 60s, the black community, segregated community, believing those 4 tenets, led our country in the growth of the middle class, 40s, 50s, and 60s, led the country in the growth of the middle class, led the country men matriculating from college, led the country men committed to marriage. Up until 1970, black women had a higher percentage of marriage than white women did because we believed as men to take care of your family. In our community, if you didn't do that, you were not considered a man. You take care of your kids, you give yourself a good name, you show value to your community. And we also led the country in the percentage of entrepreneurs. That gave me an opportunity to always dream big, to learn how to take risks, as I watched my dad do the same. And when I left the NFL, I took a risk. I decided to start a business that was going to one day give me the opportunity to have a network, the financial place to actually help encourage young people to dream big. Well, one thing I learned about business ownership, you should always keep this in mind, because I always felt that all I had to do was work really hard. If I worked really hard at anything I did, it was going to make it. Well, hard work is important, but when you come to business, you also have to have a good idea. Those two have to work hand in hand. And my hard work did not work with a good idea, and I lost everything. I'm telling you this for a reason. I literally lost everything, including what I considered at the time a good reputation. You know, I lived in New York and had a good reputation as a good football player, a good person, all that, to all of a sudden move into a one-bedroom apartment with 4 kids, work in the daytime as a chimney sweep, at night as a security guard. And I had that one night looking up out the window saying, how in the world did this happen? I mean, seriously? Let me tell you, the best thing that could ever happen was my failure. At that moment, when I was asking that question, I had this impression that it was going to be okay. It was going to work out just fine. And a few months later, I was working as a corporate executive for WordPerfect, which used to be here in Utah, even though it was in New York at that time. And for the next 25 years, I was corporate sales. Here's my message, though. I've come to opportunities like this where I talk to young people, and I tell them how great our country is, that second chance is what it really is all for all of us. And the first thing I hear in some of these places, oh yeah, well you're a football player. Of course you're going to say that. Of course you're lucky. You had it made. And my message has always been this: yes, I was a football player for 10 years, but after that I was a chimney sweep and a security guard. And I'm telling you from that point of view, if I can do it, you can do it. And that's really should be the message that all you guys incorporate in your life. Don't be afraid to talk about those downtimes. As long as you come out of it, as long as you learn something from it, you can be such an inspiration to those who are going through the same thing at the same time. Our country built on empathy. We should be able to share those tough times to give people an idea that they are temporary. They make it through it, and that everybody goes through it. So don't take tough times personal, please. It happens to everybody. Matter of fact, the more successful you are, the more you're going to give some stories about, my goodness, I had some tough times. That's what life is all about, so you can grow up. So you can grow up and have something to give to other people, and that biggest thing to give to other people is a hope that if you can do it, they can do it. Okay? Okay, I hadn't planned on telling you guys that, but anyway, I hope it helps up a little bit. So please look at me now as your congressman, as a former chimney sweep and a security guard, all right? That's very, very important. Okay, we're gonna.
So thank you, Congressman.
Okay.
It'll be my privilege now to ask you a couple questions.
Should we sit down or
yeah,
just?
please,
Okay.
Please join me up here in the chair. And I actually wanted to start off. Make sure this is what you need, Spencer. I might have a mic issue. We might need to troubleshoot for a second, but maybe let's grab a handheld if we need to, just so it. Okay, we're good. Okay, want to make sure the folks watching online can hear as well. I want to start off and first ask you, a lot of your remarks just now talked about grit and sort of personal agency. And the reason I pinpoint that is because I think it's easy in these kinds of settings and public policy conversations to be really fixated on, well, how can the government fix various issues that I'm seeing in my life or others' lives, or how can public policy create solutions? And I want to get to some of those policy questions as well, but first ask why you think it's so important, even when we're talking about public policy, to discuss personal and community and social capital. What's some advice that the folks in the audience could benefit from, especially in the context of self-government? What can we, the people, do before we necessarily turn to a public policy solution?
Great question. And there's, by the way, a book called Grit. And I'm going to highlight you guys. Everybody, look it up. Maybe audio. I have it on my audio book. Grit. I read it about 3 or 4 months ago, and what it did for me is help me understand what I had done when I was a kid that allowed me to finally get to where I am as an adult. Grit is what we all look for. And grit says very simply this: you will have tough times. That's the plan of life. Tough times, and then figure out what you can do to make a difference. One of the things that we have to also understand, and I was talking to Maddie about this earlier, but what I really love about our Constitution, our four founders, is how humble they were. They were very educated, they were going through tough times, but they knew that they were not perfect. That's why the phrase, to becoming more perfect union, is so important. They recognized that people will be better, our society will be better at time, and because they understood the concept of grit, which is basically looking inside and saying, what can I do now to make myself better, make sure I'm taking better care of my family, I can be a better steward of what I've been given. It's the opportunity to become your better self. And it will never, ever happen without tough times. So when it comes down to where the solutions come from, the easiest thing to do in life is to blame somebody else. To blame somebody else for the issues you're going through, blame somebody else for the decisions you've made, blame somebody else, and therefore somebody else has to give you the answers you need. Our country has always been based on the individual. We the people. The most powerful 3 words in the history of mankind are we the people. It's not only saying that what we can do together as we harmonize and can have conversations and come up with solutions, but where the solutions come from the very beginning is from within. And if we all know that within we can have anything we do as long as we have a God in heaven that we're really tied into, that is really why that individual grit is so important. So I'll say this. There is a tendency, and we're getting more and more into this as the society is changing, is to point to someplace else, some folks who have no idea who you are, and please give me this, please help me out, please let me get through. I mean, it is amazing the quandary problems we have. We can either allow ourselves to ask for somebody else to do it for us, or look within. I'm hoping that you guys through this process, that you learn something about what you're going through right now. Learn that the harder you study, the better you do. The harder you run and work out, the more shape you're in when that game time comes. The more the mistakes you make on the piano or the violin, the more you can produce a remarkable product when it really comes down to producing a product. That's what you should be learning right now. Tough times come. And probably some of the toughest things you have to deal with is relationships. You're dealing with relationships. And in that process of relationships, it's sometimes easy just to go along because we want to be liked. If you really want to know what's going to help you develop the kind of personality and the respect you want to have, be willing to stand by yourself if need be for things that you believe are right. You'll be amazed how many people look at you, will never ever tell you, but man, they say, wow. It is really awesome to see somebody standing up for something that I don't have the courage to do that. So utilize grit. I'm glad you mentioned that word, and I hope everybody does pick that book up and read it. I give it actually anybody that I see that I'm seeing really working hard. That conversation comes down. Have you read the book Grit? So make sure that happens. Good seeing you.
So I want to ask now, kind of shifting from that personal motivation and agency. Obviously, public policy still matters, and I want to first ask a framing question. The topics of education, transportation, and infrastructure are not always discussed as part of a common theme. Sometimes they're viewed as separate issues. There's, of course, a lot of depth you can go into with each one of those policy areas. But I wonder if you can talk for a little bit about why we ought to think of those issues as linked, that education pathways and something like roads and rail lines and infrastructure what is sort of the common theme among those policy issues that creates in your mind this idea of, well, these things linked together create opportunity for the next generation?
First of all, when I first got in Congress, there was one area that I knew I was going to be part of, and it really was just because it's been a lifelong passion. I knew, no question, I just had to find which committee it was on dealing with education. So that was kind of the beginning for me. And I say that because, go back to Thomas Jefferson, ignorant and free can never be. If we're going to have a society that's free, that's willing to have conversations that are uncomfortable, that's willing to be respectful in our process, we have to be educated. The more educated we are, the more we can have those kind of conversations. The least we are, the more angst and triggered we get because we have no place else to go in our mind. So education was part of it. The workforce thing is something that we're all kind of knowing, and you guys have some remarkable opportunities. We have such a lack of workforce in every industry possible. If you're the person that works really hard, that comes early, stays late, does the extra work, you will have a remarkable future in today's world, because there's people out there willing to pay big bucks to get somebody to show up and do hard lifting, hard work. And that hard work could be physical or it could be mental, but it is coming down to hard work. The other side of it, we spent a year and a half campaigning to get on transportation infrastructure. Now, part of that was because I understood Utah. We're the fastest growing state in the union. There's nothing like it. We have the most innovation. We have the most collaboration process from state. I was just meeting with the lieutenant governor before coming here. The things we can collaborate with, even though we have different lanes, it's remarkable. And we do it better here because we're a small state and we just have this culture that's so unique. What I'm finding out, though, is the link of education deals with how we first, not only do we have more business ownerships that now need to grow the workforce, and more of a workforce needs to satisfy that particular need. We have an opportunity right now with our growth is to figure out how to, in a very smart way, to grow our state further south, east and west, and still hold on to our culture. We can do that because of the way we collaborate, we talk about it. We also have a chance, because of the way we come with our solutions, to be the example for the rest of the country of how this works. So I look at both those committees as probably the biggest that I could do at this point. I look at that as our legacy committees. I want to be remembered as a team that was part of a delegation that disrupted a system, our educational system, so you guys are going to have more opportunities when you leave here, so you can have more opportunities to build your own businesses if you want to do that. And then also to be in a position where a state that's leading in so many ways can literally attract people to come here, afford to have businesses throughout our state because of broadband. They have education systems that's the best, so we can keep our kids here when they leave, and continue to build in a way that's very smart. So we're not putting too much pressure on any particular part of our state. So I see them working hand in hand, and I'm excited about being on both committees.
As you talk about committees, and in your remarks, you mentioned a number of pieces of legislation that you've been working on. Can you help educate our audience a little bit on the importance of committees? I think it's normal sometimes when someone says, what's going on in Washington? What's happening on a given issue? We check Twitter, I guess now X, formerly known as Twitter. We check cable news. We just look at what's going on social media to kind of get a sense of what's happening. But in a previous event, of this series, a comment was made that look to the committees. Yeah. Who are the people on the committees? That's where some of the real work is getting done. Can you help maybe give sort of almost a mini civics 101 of the importance of committees and why the work that's there is really driving a lot of this progress?
The biggest key to committees is educating the people. Remember we started with the concept, we the people? When American people are engaged and educated and they know what's really going on, it helps them to vote one way or the other to make sure we keep it going or we look in a different direction. So the more engaged we are, and that's what the committees do. I've had being on the chair of the subcommittee for education and workforce, I've had a couple committee hearings we've had so far. One is the influence of China and the communists within our school systems. We have to understand something very simple, my friends. We kind of live in this little freedom bubble. We all do, because we live in the United States of America. We think about our goals, our future, our jobs, our girlfriends, maybe later on our husband and wives, memories, building memories. We sometimes forget outside this freedom bubble is pure evil. There are ideologies that hate everything we stand for. They don't like faith, freedom, free market education. It's just the way it is. As there's good, there's bad. And sometimes we we kind of forget this out there until something comes up, whether it be Pearl Harbor, 9/11, COVID, we're all sitting and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Those are good moments for America, because we start engaging ourselves and educating ourselves, and all of a sudden tuning in to CNN to see what's going on in Congress. What are our Congress people doing to deal with our issues we're having today? We're now dealing with something very, very much in common, which makes it nicer for us to have these conversations. We're dealing with high inflation. We're dealing with a border that is just wide open, fentanyl and unvetted people coming through. We're dealing with divisiveness that many of us have never seen before like we are now. So you go through all these different things we're going through and dealing with, we want solutions. And that's where these committees come in. Our goal at the end of the day is not to continue to put our agenda out there, but put in front of the people those things that really you care about. Because if you care about it, you're going to tune in. And if we're doing our job right and articulating our thoughts right, you'll give us a chance to continue that process. If you decide that we're not doing anything, you need to fire us. You need to get rid of people who are not dealing with the issues that you truly want to have. And by the way, don't get caught up in people's names. Sometimes it's very easy to vote on a name. Educate yourself on the issues. What is important to you? And it's going to be different for everybody in here. Our goal, I'm hoping that through education like this and others, that you'll have the same high priorities that I grew up with: faith, family, free market education. If you do that, then we'll pass a remarkable opportunity down for our kids in the near future. So I mentioned the hearing on the Chinese influence, and they're all over the place. These guys, they have a plan that's been very ingenious and it's very insidious, and it's all about to break down our system of government. The other thing of what we had a hearing on is having a level playing field in terms of education. Everyone don't want to take the path you're taking, the path that I took. I went to the University of Miami. I did not go there, by the way, to be a football player one day. I was using football as a way to get a scholarship. Graduated in biology and chemistry because I wanted to be a marine biologist. Just so happened, thank goodness, I found some talent, or somebody else found some talent, and I was able to play. But my point is, it was that opportunity that, again, allowed me to see what we're doing. And with the hearings that we're having, I mentioned, the hearings we're having, there are other opportunities for kids to go through that might be their niche. It might be something through trade school, vocational school, for-profit school. They might want to be a welder, might want to be a pilot. Everyone should have the opportunity to run for your dream. And to do that, we have to make sure that on our side, we're exposing America to those other options and making sure that that as you go through your process of figuring out what you want to do, that you have the best choices out there to make that happen.
You've mentioned a couple times the idea of different pathways, different kinds of opportunities. And of course, in this venue where we're here at a university, and the kind of the traditional four-year degree is a path that many people choose, and evidence shows it can be very, very helpful as far as upward mobility and financial stability and career options later in life. But I want to get your take on, and you mentioned growth as well, which is something we'll dive into in the policy panel immediately after this portion. But as Utah grows, we're adding people. There's a lot of demographic changes that are happening that we'll get into later. But what do you think needs to be the vision of education and workforce training? So thinking both K-12 as well as post-secondary. Is it just a matter of we need more seats, we need more capacity, or do we need a lot more options, more types of educational pathways, or is it a combination of both?
We recognize that every one of us are different. Everyone's have different passions, different things that will make us happy in terms of things we do. We have folks who live, their passion is to go out and study birds every day. They love it. And because they love it, they give us insight that a person like myself who does not like studying birds can now know at least. That's what makes us such a unique and special society. So what does it come down to? When you think about the free market, we believe in the free market. Free market very simply says this: you should have choices, period. You should decide, based on your day, whether it be pricing, convenience, the value, what's cool, whatever that might be, your choice should be how you put that money that you worked hard for and get back what you desire to get. Choice. This is not something that happens across this country, around the world, my friends. You don't have these choices. So based on that, we should give every young person the choice, the option to go in whatever their passion might be, and let them pursue their dreams. I'll tell you one thing, when you're going for something that you're really excited about, you don't mind taking risks, you don't mind failing. Because you care about it so much, you'll get back up and keep going. That's the passion. And by the way, that's how we build great entrepreneurs in this country. Because you go through that process, you realize, I could have done it this way, I'm going to learn this. And before you know it, hey, you know what, I can make a lot of money by teaching what I learned. And people will come with the value that I felt. So yes, we have to make sure every option should be on the table when it comes to education. Online, traditional, trade, vocational, whatever it is. And if people are willing to put their dollars in because they see their income, they should be doing it. Anybody who stops that, we have to be concerned about why. Why would somebody stop you having the choices you want to have in whatever arena you want to go in? Those are the voices we need to make sure we're standing up against. And thank goodness we have a conference now that truly believes in choice. And so we're going to make sure it happens in all levels.
In the context of creating that kind of educational system of pluralism of options that you're talking about, I want to ask you about the different roles and responsibilities of different levels of government. As context for that, in a previous congressional series and in an op-ed and on an episode of Sutherland's podcast, our education policy fellow, Christine Fairbanks, made the argument that if we really want to make important reforms in education policy, maybe Congress should actually do less and states should do more. So I want to get your reaction to that. I'm sure it's a little bit, hey, I'm in this institution where we're doing some good things, but maybe to frame the question in this way, what do you view as the appropriate balance between the role of the federal government and the role of the states with respect to education policy?
Those three words I mentioned before, we the people should have the most power in their hands to run their lives. That means getting closer, and that's why rather we do have a lane we need to stay in. And our goal really is to get us back into the lane we need to stay in. States should have more power. Districts should have more power. Parents should have more power when it comes down to education of kids from pre-K through 12. And at the same time, as we get into the higher ed, that's a little different conversation, because higher ed is a direct connect with the federal, with federal government. And we play a big part in taxpayers' income to make sure these places are being held up and thriving. So we should be holding those institutions accountable, which I'm excited about, because that's something we can do right now. When it comes down to pre-K through 12, which also needs a lot of reform, but it should be done on the state level. And let me say this, why am I so excited about where we are today? I have never seen the type of engagement with parents that I've seen these last couple of years. That's where it has to be. Parents have to know further. They know their child. They want to make sure their child is happy, successful, and so they should have a big play in terms of what's happening in the school system. And if that particular system is not working, that parent can say, you know what, if it doesn't work for my child here, I'm going to put him here. I'll put him here. I have grandkids that are going across the board, online, in school, hybrid. We're now looking at one of my daughters having 8 parents that can put together a pod with a curriculum that's really pretty cool. So this is really where the innovation comes in. And I'll say to the point, we should be, as Congress people, innovative legislators. We should not be mandating our all-encompassing wisdom on everybody on how you guys should be doing what you do. Innovative legislator says very simply this: I don't know it all. I'm trying to figure it all out. Innovators, please let me know what it looks like. Innovators, for instance, in this industry here, you're dealing with it every single day. How can we make sure we get a better result with our kids? They have not only higher educational metrics, but also higher professional metrics. They get into jobs quicker. And if you're figuring that out, how can we help? And the question will be, is there a federal nexus or not? If there is, we'll work it out. If not, we'll collaborate with the state and figure out how can we support it, how can, without strings attached, to support it in any kind of way we do. But it should be very, very key. We, the people, should have the ultimate power, and that's why our Constitution was set up from the very beginning.
We've got just a couple minutes left. I want to give you a chance if there's anything else we missed on transportation to mention. And you mentioned growth earlier, especially as Utah is seeing these rapid rates of growth. Is there one thing that comes to the top of your mind that you really worry about us getting wrong when it comes to transportation or infrastructure broadly? Or to flip it, is there one thing that you think we really need to make sure we get this right to accommodate our growth here in Utah?
Okay. The only concern I have about getting it wrong, and this goes to education, I'm going to flip back to the other side of it. Only thing I'm concerned about with education in this remarkable state is we have parents that are very trusting. We live in a pretty cool culture where most people are really, really good folks. Crime rate is not that high, relatively speaking. We kind of just grow up thinking we can trust. Parents need to realize when you put your kids into school, follow up. That is your goal, to make sure that just working with the teachers the way I did when I was growing up. My mom was a high school teacher. My dad was a college professor. If I got in trouble in school, I knew there was no talking out of this one. Trouble was going to happen when I stepped in the house. My first step in the house, there's going to be trouble. And I couldn't say, Mom, Dad, she's wrong or he's wrong. No, I was going to suffer the consequences because there was that connection that the product was, at the end of the day, going to be a good one for our country, our society. So that's the only thing I'm concerned about. Make sure that we're getting engaged, understand the process, understand the curriculum, understand what your kids are, have a track of which you're succeeding, understand what that looks like, and then also understand what the options are. Okay, so that's on the other side of it. I am so excited about Utah. I brag about it all the time because we are really out front in so many industries. So many. I mean, I'm not surprised anymore. Whatever industry we're talking about, we're innovative enough, we work hard enough, we collaborate enough that we are in the very, very top. We have things right now like the inland port that will literally make us the distribution hub of the entire West. We can take pressure off the West Coast. We can deal with import export from here. It's a right to work state, so we can do it at a much cheaper rate. We understand what it is to have a budget, to hold tight to it. So we can do things right here in that regard. And we also have the different facets throughout our state that will allow that to happen. So we're dealing with inland port, we're dealing with the Salt Lake City Airport, which is it's just a remarkable airport we have there. We're in a position of just doing some really good things, of drawing good people here. Here's what I want to make sure we also take into account. Let's not continue to export our most precious treasure, our kids. We need to make sure that we're growing out a place where our kids can afford to stay here. They have the jobs they can actually have here. They can start their businesses and knowing that the regulations will be low enough, they can be profitable. And we have the entire state we can look at how can we grow ourselves in a smart way. We do that, we keep our culture, our kids, our propensity to be number one. This place, I tell you, is just gonna be a great thing for your kids, your grandkids, and like you might be like myself, the miracle of having like 6 kids here and 17 grandkids, never thought that'll ever happen, but they're all within 45 minutes. And I wanna work hard to make sure it stays that way.
Congressman, we're about at time, so for the last question, if I can just ask for your brief response to leave us with a little bit of optimism. You mentioned in your speech the idea of being nice.
Yeah.
Those of us who are outside of observers of Washington, D.C. politics might conclude that there's no room for being nice back there, but I want to ask you, in our most intense policy debates, it's not about necessarily having to agree more, but is there space for being nice even when we're disagreeing in D.C. or elsewhere?
It is, and I'll say it regarding our conference. It's been a very unique time that we'll have back in D.C. I don't know how many guys stayed up late night watching the 15 rounds. Anybody stayed up to watch that? There's 15 rounds to get our speaker. It was, I mean, adults across the country staying up 2 o'clock because something like that's never happened. We have a five seat majority, which basically means that we're going to have a lot of disagreements. But if we can figure out how to stay focused on the one things we do keep in mind, that we do share our thoughts with, and right now that thing for our conference is bring our country back. Make sure that the middle class stays as robust as ever. By the way, the middle class is what makes our country such a unique place. There's nothing like it anywhere around the world. I'll tell you why. Because that middle class that we work with to defend back in DC, that you guys can be part of, is where empathy comes in, service, ingenuity, and innovation, making sure the people around are feeling we're accepting people because we have this faith. And that middle class is powered by the business owners. So that's actually what I think is going to be the upside of what we're doing right now. I think Utah has an opportunity to truly be the starter state of our country. The things you guys are doing here, just know that it's different across this country right now. We might not agree on everything, but boy, the way we resolve our issues is really cool. We're more patient. Not that it's always perfect, we're more patient. We try to find that line of commonality. I think that Utah, at the end of the day, because we lead in so many different ways, and I talked about it before, I looked at, we were number one. Let's make sure I get this right. We're number one in economy and fiscal responsibility. Well, once we become number one in everything else, infrastructure, education, embracing our differences, having conversations that are difficult, but we can still make it through it and then go to a football game or a basketball game. Those are the things that we have a chance, because of our culture, to do that's not out there anyplace else. So I want to say this, you guys have been blessed, whether it be to have been raised here or to, like Maddie, come and visit for a while. This is a remarkable place to hone your skills that will impact not only you, but people across this country and around the world. So take advantage of it. Be optimistic, have grit. I realize that you're here for a purpose. It's not by accident. You're sitting here right now. And take advantage of that and really make it good for yourself. And as you do that, everybody else will benefit too.
Congressman, thank you so much for your
Okay,
time. Let's
you
have a
betcha.
round of applause for our speaker.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
We encourage you all to keep your seats. The event continues. We're going to have our policy panel come up and join us. We'll drill a little bit deeper into some of the topics we just talked about.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Oh, sure. I can't take that home with me.
As we're transitioning here, I'll just introduce our two panelists that'll come up here and join me. We're joined by Derek Monson, who is the Chief Growth Officer for Sutherland Institute, and also Mallory Bateman, who is the Director of Demographic Research and State Data Center Coordinator at the Kem Gardner Policy Institute. Right here in the middle would be great. Thanks, folks in the room, for your patience as we do a little shuffle and make sure that our folks online can see and hear still. So Derek and Mallory, I want to start off the conversation with something similar to what I asked the congressman, but the idea of these three topics of education, transportation, and infrastructure are often discussed in silos. So from a policy standpoint or from a growth trajectory standpoint, what's the rationale for thinking of those things in the same vein, or at least linked together in some way? Mallory, maybe let's start with you. If there are growth aspects that suggest why we should be thinking of these things similarly, and then Derek, go to you.
Yeah, well, I'll just start by saying we have a history of planning for these things and thinking about growth. In Utah, our population has kind of always grown since we were counted in the decennial census. So we have a very long history of growth. And then, you know, in the work that we do at the Gardner Institute, we produce long-term planning projections to look out into the future that are used heavily by our transportation planning organizations, water organizations, agencies. Education uses those as well. So everyone wants to kind of stay a step ahead of the changes we're anticipating, and so hopefully our data can help with that.
Yeah, well, I think that, you know, there's one of the commonalities, I guess, between education, infrastructure, and transportation is they're all things that are real tools for us to, you know, to go places in life, whether that's physically, you know, you drive on the freeway to get to school here or go to work, or with education, your launches you into your life. Now, I will say, particularly with education, that's not all education is, right? Education, I think it's worth noting, is an end in itself, right? It expands your mind, can expand your soul, kind of thing. But in the sense that it's similar to these other issues, it is kind of a mechanism for moving in your life where you want to be.
So let's dive into growth a little bit more. I mean, again, the growth that Utah's experiencing is not really a surprise to any of us. We see it every day. We feel sometimes the traffic congestion. Think, oh, where'd all these people come from? But it's a good thing because it means people want to move here, and the people that are here want to raise their families here. And so I want to ask kind of a general question, and again, start with you, Mallory. What do we need to understand about Utah's growth, our population growth and change? In what ways are we growing? Thinking about migration coming in versus families here having kids and raising those kids here. Just give us kind of a lay of the land of what growth is happening and why that matters in the context of discussions about things like education and transportation.
Yeah, so if we look last decade, 2/3 of our growth came from natural increase, so that's the births minus the deaths. I will say those births can be from people who moved here last decade and had their kids here. If you look back a little farther, in the 1990s, we saw a lot of migration to the state. I'm actually a result of that migration, and I consider myself a Utahn, so something to remember when we're thinking about those movers that are coming into the state. If we look out into the future, we do anticipate migration to play a bigger role, in part because we have aging population. So unfortunately, as you age, you're more and more likely that you're gonna kind of exit the population. And then we have declining fertility rates and declining births. So declining fertility rates with a caveat on that declining births. So when you have more deaths and fewer births, that kind of shifts that natural increase lever of growth. And then we anticipate in our work, the economy in the state is still going to be something that's attractive to people. It's going to keep growing, it's going to keep diversifying. And so we anticipate migration being a stronger and stronger factor, really driven by the economics. I will say that the births, we have these declining fertility rates, but we also are going to see a larger chunk of the population get to childbearing age. So even if everyone decided to have fewer kids, if you have a larger population that could potentially have kids, you do see increases in the births over time, as well as that school age, kid population. So something to consider. There is a lot of, there's a lot of layers to all of that growth.
So Derek, what implication does this have? I mean, in a very simplistic way, probably that, well, more people means we need to educate more folks, we need more capacity for people to get around in terms of transportation. What are some of the policy implications that you think our elected leaders, such as Congressman Owens and our state leaders, need to be aware of that growth is going to have by way of impact on those issues?
Yeah. Well, one I think that they generally are aware of is the increased impact on our infrastructure, whether that's roads, whether that's energy needs and those kinds of things. We need more sewers, more homes, more of everything as there's more people. There are a lot of challenges in lots of those areas, so it's not as simple as saying we need these things and therefore they're going to happen. Voila, they're here. But that's one implication. I think one gets back to what Mallory said about how nuanced this is. As the type of growth we're experiencing happens with more people, but an aging population, you start to see changes, particularly within the state. So, for example, in Salt Lake School District, the growth that's happening there is such that they're having to consider closing down. I think it's something like 7 schools or something, a number of elementary schools, because they're getting more people, but they're having fewer kids in their schools. Whereas, say, in a place like Utah County, there are a lot more kids down there, relatively speaking, in terms of sources of growth. And so it's going to vary across the state, but ultimately you're going to need more of something or a variety of things. And also the services that we need for our population is going to change. So with an aging demographic, older generation, older people need different services than kids and young families. And so that's some changes that we're going to see. I think you're going to start to experience it too in how communities are built, for example. and what amenities are provided in a community versus ones that you're expected to drive somewhere and go get those. So those things are going to change too.
It sounds like there's a theme maybe we can tease out that as we're experiencing this growth and we're looking at how it impacts education, transportation, and other elements of infrastructure, it's maybe not quite as simple as just, well, everything we have today, let's just dial the volume up and have more of what we have today. Yes, there are probably some capacity needs, but also, is there a demand for, I guess, greater variety of greater types of things like educational pathways, whether that's K-12 options or post-secondary workforce training. So Mallory, I want to start with you. Is there anything that you have seen in terms of the demographic trends that show sort of demand pushing on not just upward pressure on capacity, but I don't know if lateral pressure, whatever the right term would be, but for more types of educational or vocational pathways? Is the demand not just growing, but is it also demanding different kinds of things? Anything in your data that might give a clue to that?
I mean, I think it's easier to look at transportation for me, just I'm a little more aware of that, but looking at transportation, a lot of their growth is along the Wasatch Front. It's along this skinny, narrow, constrained corridor, and there are more and more people coming in, and there's not places to do the normal of building a new freeway, continuing to expand a freeway. You also have different needs and desires of those residents to get up and down that teeny skinny corridor. And so, I think just looking at the growth and what we anticipate moving forward, there has to be different solutions added into the mix, because what we have now, just continuing on that kind of status quo, isn't going to be sustainable.
So as you're looking at that, let's expand on that for a moment for folks in the room in the context of broadband. So when we talk about infrastructure, I mean, that could be everything from transportation, public transportation, cars. There's other elements of infrastructure such as, water and sewer for new developing communities, things like parks or law enforcement and emergency response. And so as you're articulating, look, the growth where it's happening will kind of impact what kinds of things are needed. Is an expansion of broadband internet something that can maybe take some of the pressure off of that, especially in the post-COVID era where we've seen so much more remote work and hybrid work? For either one of you, is that maybe a solution that can help address some of the pressures that you're identifying, Mallory?
Derek? In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, I think. So, if you have, say, more people working remote or on a flex schedule of some kind, because you have better internet access and things for like video conferencing, video calls, that kind of thing, that will ease some pressures on other types of infrastructure. However, if the population growth overall is large enough, that might overwhelm the shift towards remote. Simply the number of people, who are still going into the office at least several days a week. So it's a little bit uncertain, I think. But you will see, I think, different types of challenges than we've had before, and things like broadband internet could be ways of either addressing those things, or it could lead to the kinds of innovations that could address those things. There's I think some examples of, for example, Silicon Valley or the Silicon Slopes here, where you have high levels of technological advancement, and that creates all types of new innovations and things that change how we live and work and raise our families in ways that alleviate some problems and then maybe create new ones or new challenges that we have to start facing that we hadn't thought about before.
Mallory, I want to go back to something that you mentioned of the declining fertility rates in general throughout the country in the West, and somewhat surprisingly for folks perhaps here in Utah. And there was a Gardner Institute policy forum that Derek participated on as a panelist as well, and Mallory, your work informing that audience of kind of some of these demographic trends. Maybe to put it very simply, if folks out there are thinking, okay, so on the one hand we're saying we're growing too fast and we're trying to accommodate that. And then there's other data that's coming out saying, well, our fertility rates are declining. Why wouldn't the response be, great, maybe that's going to offset it a little bit, we won't have to worry so much? Is it a little more complicated than that?
I think there's a lot of judgment that's individual level on that kind of assessment. I do think if we anticipate continued growth kind of similar to what we have experienced in the past, then what you said is the offset that is what we, are counting on. If we shut off all the roads, everything, no one else can come in tomorrow. We actually have a paper that's going to come out soon, but if we kept the people who are here today and that's it, our population in 2060 would be 4 million instead of like 5.5. So it would we'd still grow, but it's a lot more moderate. And if you look to other Western states, if you look to like places like Montana or Wyoming, they've kind of had this very slow and steady growth rate, and that we'd be a little more like that compared to other places in our region that have been super fast growing and have experienced some different things. So I'll let everyone assess on their own value scale whether that's good or bad.
Sure. Derek, I want to go back to something you mentioned as well. When we're talking about geographic growth happening in different ways and at different levels in different regions, and you mentioned school districts, how there might be instances of closing some school districts, or schools rather, and needing to build more schools elsewhere. One, I want to ask you if there's anything deeper you want to mention on that, and are there any other sort of policy implications, perhaps tax revenues, as policymakers are kind of looking at the landscape of growth that's going to be uneven in different parts of the state, and then looking, okay, what does this mean for education? What does this mean for tax revenue? What does this mean for other government services that we need to fund? What else should people be aware of what some of those impacts might be?
Well, in the education space, and I should say, I think some of this is maybe due to population growth and demographic changes, but some of it is more just due to other factors regardless of the number of people. I think there is an increasing desire for different kinds of models of education that maybe that desire wasn't strong in the past. I think you saw it with COVID and people doing remote education. I know we have currently a sixth grader who at the time when things first shut down was in second grade. And you got a different window into what your kids were learning and how they were learning. And for a lot of parents, I think that some maybe it changed their view dramatically, but probably the larger portion, it maybe didn't change it dramatically, but it did kind of have some effect, right, about what they'd like to see from their kids' education. And so you started to see an increase in demand and interest in programs, that would allow for either remote learning. You start to see more school districts form virtual schools, and a number of those have stuck around. Some have gone away after things kind of opened back up, but a number have stuck around. And you've also seen more interest in private school choice, being able to use public dollars to facilitate getting their child into private school or into more of a homeschool situation where they have a little more financial help or more resources that are not financial than maybe they did in the past. In fact, you start to see very interesting models, and this one predates COVID, but for a few years, we sent our daughter to a charter school down in Utah County in Pleasant Grove that had an in-person kind of typical experience if you wanted it. And then they had this other track where they would provide you access to curriculum materials. This is a public school, it's a public charter school, and you schooled at home, sometimes 5 days a week. You could do it more of like a 4-day-a-week model. And so they are, again, trying to accommodate parents with a diverse set of interests in how we educate kids. And I think that has grown over the years. A perfect example might be just looking at what happened, without wading into something too controversial. Then again, that's okay if we do that too, I suppose. The voucher program here that got referendumed. I don't know how you say that, but there was a referendum and it lost by 60 to 40 basically. And then just recently, Utah passed a program that's comparable, but it's different. Has a lot more flexibility in how you can use the funds, and that doesn't seem to be drawing the same kind of opposition. There are some concerns, but you're not seeing that show up on the ballot from a referendum, for instance. So things have changed, and part of that is population growth and demographic change. Part of that is these other factors that have just broadened, I think, the diversity of interest in how we educate our kids.
Derek, it strikes me that brings up something that Mallory, you and I talked about when we were prepping for this event together, but is this idea of adaptability, that as things are changing in the state, is what should elected officials take away from that in terms of, well, can we think outside the box more now than we used to because of these changing demographics? And Derek's example of an education policy intervention that public opinion maybe was different now than it was in years past. Is there anything else that you think should point to, because our demographics are changing and we're growing, maybe it just points to a general attitude of, let's be innovative. Let's think of policy solutions maybe we hadn't thought of before, or maybe that weren't quite ready yet. What are some key takeaways that elected officials should keep in mind in that regard?
I think they should keep in mind, and this isn't going to be very original, but the population is changing, and it's changing in ways that we've sort of seen in the past, but we're a different group of people that are Utahns now than we were in 2010, than we were in 2000, than we were in 1990. And so thinking that we should continue to operate the same way without looking, like giving things a second look or thinking about things differently, is not what I would do if I was a decision maker. We're more racially and ethnically diverse on top of these shifts in our age structure. And so there's more going on than what we had in the past. And so I just think it provides an opportunity to maybe re-examine some things and maybe change things.
I want to follow up on this idea of different kinds of growth. And again, kind of those two broad categories of folks moving into the state versus native Utahns having kids, and both of those adding to the growth in different ways. Is there anything in any of the demographic data that shows that those two types of growth have any different impact on whether it is public policy or our communities, anything about our culture? And is there more of a generational rootedness for native Utahns? And I ask that with a huge caveat that I'm also not a native Utahn. I moved here a little over a decade ago, and now we're raising our kids here and feel very generationally rooted. We love Utah. And so is there anything that can point to those different kinds of growth manifesting in different ways with respect to pressure or influence on various policy? Or is it basically that, hey, once people move here and the congressman talked a lot about how great Utah is, if you come here to visit, you'll find yourself wanting to stay here. Is it all kind of this, everybody feels that rootedness, so maybe after a little while it doesn't really matter whether they moved here or have been here for a long time. It's all just part of the growth. These are new Utahns that now we need to accommodate through these various services. Any clues, does any of that make a difference in the long run?
We don't get any of the kind of why or attitude approach to anything in the work that we do. I would point people to like Pew Research. They have a lot that kind of doesn't necessarily get to like being a Utahn, but kind of talks about these shifts over time. I think you kind of answered your own question in the way that you navigated it, and thinking about people that I know.
Looking for data to back me
I
up,
know.
right?
Unfortunately, we don't have that data because it's what people feel. It's a sentiment, right? And so that is great qualitative data, but we don't have that. So I would say if people are living here and they want to live here, then we need to understand that they're Utahns, and let's make sure that they're getting what they need.
Derek, anything to add to that from the policy angle?
Yeah, I mean, well, we don't have a lot of quantitative data like Mallory's saying. I think you have, historical examples, you could go back all the way to, ancient kind of examples if you wanted, but I think where you end up having significant change that really shakes things around is when you have dramatic, large inflows of people who come from another place, And I don't think we're experiencing anything on that order in Utah. So, yes, can it, in theory, change things? I think so. But is that what we're experiencing? I don't think so. We're experiencing maybe regular incremental inflow of people. But also, just to highlight some of the new initial nuance, Mallory mentioned some, about people move here and then have kids. There are a lot of people who move here who were born here. Like they leave the state for a period of time and come back. Whether
25% of movers right before COVID.
Yeah, so just the fact that they moved in doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a strong attachment here. And this is what I get into, I don't think we're having that huge influx of people into any community really. never say never, maybe there is some that I'm not aware of. But the point is just that as a state, as a whole, you know, you are probably seeing some incremental change because, you know, if folks have been born elsewhere, grown up elsewhere, and then you come to a state, whether it's Utah or any other state for that matter, things are going to be a little different than you're used to. And so I think it's normal you maybe like some of that stuff that's different, and maybe you don't like some of that stuff that's different. And you have to work through that, you know, in your community. And if you do have a community maybe that draws people that way, I mean, I think I actually live in a city that if there is one that has that dynamic going on, it's Lehigh, right? It's kind of right in the kind of Silicon Slopes kind of area. So you have a lot of people who are coming from either from Silicon Valley, companies setting up shop here or things like that. And they want to live close to their businesses. Lehigh's a generally good location. But I wouldn't say you're having such inflow that it's like, it doesn't feel like Utah anymore or anything close to that, really. But there are different dynamics you do have to wade through because people with different views or of whatever stripe, whether that's political, cultural, other kinds of views, you have to wade through those things.
It seems like there's to some extent a consensus that you know, folks who want to move here, Utah's a great place, come on in. And folks who want to stay here, we hope you stay here because Utah's a great place, and so much of the opportunity and the quality of life. And from the congressman's comments, it's really comes down to, we know we're growing, we welcome the growth. It's a good, I guess, public policy challenge to have, to be able to ask yourself the question, okay, well, how do we educate everyone? How do we have an infrastructure that supports this growth? And as we're in the process of answering those questions as a state, I wonder if there are any things we can learn from any other states around the country or any other regions. Is there any place that's really just figured it out, that is able to say, hey, we're growing, but our education system is keeping pace the way it needs to, our infrastructure is keeping pace the way it needs to? Any best practices, or are there things that we should be looking for? If we haven't found a really good best practice yet, what kinds of clues could we maybe find in other states or other regions that could help inform how we grow here? Mallory, maybe start with you. Anything that we ought to be looking for?
I will say, and I was thinking about, I'm on a panel in like 2 weeks looking at aging in place and planning, so I could have come back with more information after that panel. But I will say, you know, like the Northeast of the United States, and I know that's a very culturally different place, but they've been experiencing the aging of the population in a really dramatic way for a lot longer than us. And so if there are communities that, you know, are experiencing things a little bit more rapidly here that aren't sure what to do, like maybe there are some examples there. And then this is kind of connected, but the state is using a previous example kind of Envision Utah processes, but they're doing an outreach project looking at water, transportation, open space, and affordable housing called Guiding Our Growth. And today is the last day, or tomorrow is the last day that you can submit your comments on what you think there. But the state is also trying to get input from people on how we do navigate these things in a way that maybe alleviates some of those pinch points we're feeling right now.
Derek, what should we be looking for elsewhere as far as best practices?
Well, if it's okay, I'd like to actually jump back. I don't know that I have a ton to say on that. There are examples of states that are growing, but I don't have particularly strong insights into those. But I want to amend one thing I was talking about earlier, because it's just the thought occurred to me, that maybe you are having some areas in Utah where demographic change in population growth, or in this case, not lack of growth, is changing things in this. It's probably rural Utah, right? So I think there are areas of the state where, you know, either the population is decreasing, or where just a little bit of demographic change can have a big impact just because of the total numbers aren't as high. And you do have that going on in places of rural Utah. And maybe that is actually to the question, because I know I just basically skipped the question. I think there are probably things to learn on that score. You know, there are a lot of areas of the country that either they're rural or they were based on industries that were thriving, say in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and have, you know, decreased over time. What the impacts are of that kind of demographic change, and it creates real challenges for those communities. and things like deaths of despair, things like just how you deal with just a decreasing population of people beyond the deaths of despair issue. But that's one thing that's popped up in a lot of areas, and so that's something we need to be, I think, very conscious as we talk about population growth and changes. Is there is growth in a lot of the state, and then there is a lack of growth or decrease in other areas of the state, and those should not be ignored.
Well, with that, we'll transition to our Q&A portion. So any folks in the audience, any thoughts or questions, what's on your mind that you want to ask our panelists? And I think we should have a couple of house microphones to go around. I think Nick might have just stepped out, but if someone can track him down, we'll bring a microphone to you. So go ahead and raise your hand with any questions that you have for our panelists. And while you're thinking of what questions you have, I guess to start kind of this room discussion, it seems like if there's nothing else that we can take away from this entire conversation, is basically this idea that as we understand the growth that is happening and in different ways in different regions, and also the aging of the population, there's demographic change happening, and sometimes that can make folks a little anxious to say, well, I like Utah the way it is. Maybe I don't want it to change, but it seems to be that the key policy question is, how do we accommodate this growth that we know is here and will continue in a way that all of us can say, well, my quality of life as a Utahn is not diminished, my opportunities are not diminished. And in fact, those things are improved, and especially for the next generation, for our kids, that they can call Utah home and have a quality of life and a suite of opportunities in their lives that is as good as or better than we've experienced. So it seems like is that kind of a key principle? Anything you would add to that as a takeaway principle? And then we'll go to any questions from folks in the audience.
Well, I think it's one of the driving principles for a lot of people. Are we building kind of community that, or a state or a city, that my kids are going to be able to grow up in, and where I want them to grow up in, and that are going to have those opportunities? It's one of those kind of key questions of the American dream, right? Is what do you feel about the prospects for your kids, or alternatively, how are people's economic prospects relative to previous generations? We use those as gauges of things. So I think it's clearly a principle that matters in these conversations.
Mallory, anything to add to that?
I think the conversations I am in are always, how are our kids going to live here? That is an overarching theme. And I think one kind of nerd point is we've kind of entered into like the next stage of states. Like, we're not a tiny state anymore. We're kind of like middle-sized state. But with that, there are new challenges. And I think some of the challenges are kind of new to us as Utahns, or for Utah decision makers. They're coming in ways that maybe we thought we were kind of immune to, I think, because we are a special place. We had, historically been a little bit isolated. And so I think change can be difficult, change can be hard, but I think it's showing that we're maturing. We're maturing out of kind of our like startup phase of statehood, and there will continue to be new challenges that come up, and so just remembering, if I was a decision maker, the desire to serve all Utahns would be in the back of my mind.
Excellent. So questions from the audience, please go ahead and raise your hand. Anybody have a question they want to ask our panelists about growth, about education policy, about transportation? Go here first, sir, and then you in the back.
Obviously, government needs to provide the support for a growing population. But there are a lot of things government would like to do that really don't need to be done. So talk me through, if you would, the disadvantages of allowing a more laissez-faire kind of growth. Let businesses locate where they want to locate. Let people live where they want to live. Let apartment buildings be built where they can make money. Why shouldn't we just allow laissez-faire growth to happen, supported obviously by however the government can support it?
Well, I think I'll jump in there. I think you're seeing some of that, and it depends on communities. Different communities handle it differently. I think, for instance, interestingly enough, because it kind of smacks, I think, against the stereotype, when you see housing growth and development in places like Salt Lake City, Are they laissez-faire? I don't know. I would describe it that way, but they are very open-minded in letting developers come in and potentially provide solutions for their community. It's not all about, no, it has to, fit all these straitjacket kinds of requirements. In some communities, though, that is kind of how it is, right? They have a very significant defined community feel, and they want to stick things within that context. So, I mean, I guess specifically to your question, why can't we do kind of more of a laissez-faire, more just kind of a let things grow as people desire? I think you can. I think you just have to be ready to accept the consequences of that, right? Or the natural outcomes of that, which is there might be some things that come into the community you don't like. And that's where I think you get a lot of pushback, when people see that that's what they feel is happening in their communities. And so maybe, I guess, what I'm coming to is maybe the reason that doesn't happen as much is simply because there's so many communities where there tends to be some kind of backlash against it when people really do just try to let things go as say, a property owner wanted or a developer or whatever. But at the same time, I think you do have a significant openness, and maybe more than we give credit for, to allowing growth in ways that meets the unique needs we have in terms of housing or water infrastructure, population growth and development. It's maybe a little more complicated, I think, than maybe you might just see in the headlines and that kind of thing.
Valerie, anything to add to that?
I'm thinking of the Envision Utah exercises they did in the early 2000s, and part of that was, cities could sign on, once they came up with their plans, cities could sign on to enact, in whatever way suited their community, plans that would match kind of the grand scheme, put forward in this Envision process. And part of that, the root of it was shared values, like shared desire to protect open space, shared, we don't want sprawl everywhere, and we don't want to have to drive an hour and a half to get from my house up on campus. And so, I think even as we change, you still have those shared values. We're kind of seeing that in the initial, feedback we're getting from Guiding Our Growth. People move to Utah because they love, our outdoor space. We want to protect it. We love having openness and public spaces and green things, And so I think as the population changes, you still do have something brought people here, right? And it's shared or not, I think that's part of why you don't just let people do whatever they want. Some communities that might work great, but I think especially just the Wasatch Front itself, we're so close. It gets really tricky when you try to let people just kind of go out and do what they want.
Yeah, there are impacts to that kind of thing on other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, could I have one more thing too?
Please.
I think one issue that oftentimes people run up against in trying to do what they want to do, say with their property, for example, like you mentioned apartment buildings being built where they can make money, those kinds of things, is the level of understanding from local policymakers about what their authority really is and is not. We don't really do a great job, I think, in the state. Not saying the state should be the one to do it, but of helping people who get elected in city and county levels necessarily understand what their defined roles are in the Constitution, whether it's a state Constitution primarily, but maybe in the federal Constitution as well. And then within the system of Utah, within what statutes exist, delegating authority to cities and counties. And so now over time, I think you have a lot of city elected officials who pick that stuff up. So I'm not saying they don't know anything. I think a lot of them know a lot. But when they first come in, you have some struggles there. And so you get actions that ultimately either get overturned or that maybe they don't get overturned initially, but it causes difficulties in how we grow and develop simply by a matter of, we need to truly understand what the roles of different levels of elected officials are and what they're not. And to the extent that that isn't happening, you can get a lot of things that just end up complicating growth unnecessarily. And it's complicated enough as it is. So we don't need to do it in any more than that is.
It's an excellent question. Thank you. There was another hand back here.
So a common theme we've been talking about today is education, the importance of education in Utah. But right now, Utah's number 43 in the United States for per pupil spending. Do you think that's going to change at any point, or do you think the Utah legislature is going to put more of an emphasis on trying to educate it's better. I just kind of want to know you guys' opinion on that.
Yeah, well, so I think that has been changing. We've been kind of moving up the scale little by little, and I think the first thing that you have to understand is, whenever you're talking about a per pupil level of education spending in Utah, is the unique challenge that we're the only state with a lot of kids, but we are one of the states with a lot of kids, and so when you look at how, say, the legislature actually chooses to spend the discretionary funds that they have, the overwhelming chunk of it goes to schools. I think it's hard to really look at the facts and honestly say that our state lawmakers are not spending money on schools. Now, a lot of people want them to spend more, and that's what a lot of our policy debates are about. And I think that's why you have been seeing Utah kind of move up the scale there a little bit. But given the dynamic of how many kids we have, it's really challenging to see Utah being like the top 5 or something. So because it would, I think if we were ever being honest about how much money that would require and the tax rates that would require, it would be rejected wholesale. And we never get there. I think because the people who want more funding in education recognize that it will be rejected wholesale, so they don't go there. And that's okay, right? I mean, that's politics, right? I'm not trying to criticize that. I think it's just trying to describe that's how it plays out. So I think those are the challenges. But it's a great question.
Do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I'll just say from the data side, we have a little piece, in our projections, we have age detail. And so we have a piece that's looking at the school age population change over time. And we're showing, in the near future kind of decreases in the school age population, but then about 10 years, 15 years later, it goes back up again. And so I just hope decision makers look at that whole picture and not just a couple year picture, because if they see a decrease and think that's an opportunity for maybe savings, we might have more kids coming down the pipeline, and we need to be prepared for them and not shortchange those kids in the future. So that would be my data-related point.
So there's, and I don't know all the details on this, so I'm going to be a little vague because I don't want to say something that's just factually inaccurate. But there was this last legislative session, I believe, a new policy enacted specifically for this situation of when the school age, district enrollment decreases, and to help kind of cushion the blow to schools when that happens. So I think we do have policymakers who are thinking about those things, particularly with the kind of near-term projections, and taking steps to, like I say, make sure it doesn't lead to a school that loses 10% of its kids and 10% of its money, but it still has the same amount of buildings and infrastructure to pay for and all those kinds of things. And so I think there is some recognition of those realities going on.
Well, I don't know if the house lights are signaling we're almost out of time, or there's something else going on. But we have time for one more question, if please, right here, and then we'll wrap up after that.
So you're talking about the open lands and stuff like that. You mentioned like the hiking and stuff like that. Along with that, as the population grows, farm and ranch land is decreased. Is the state doing anything to protect the ranching and farming of Utah, or is like the new vision for Utah just like a very urbanized place where farm and ranch isn't part of the economics or anything anymore?
I can't speak to what the state is doing, but I will say, 75% of us live along the Wasatch Front, so that leaves 25 other counties. Cache County and Washington County are our other 2 major population centers. So we do have a lot of counties with small populations that, as Derek mentioned, aren't really experiencing the growth or change in the way we're experiencing it up here. So we do have a couple different pictures to deal with in terms of that growth and change, but I can't speak to any kind of decisions on land use.
Yeah, at the state level, I don't know that there's a lot going on, primarily because that is a local decision. Whether land is used for commercial use, residential, or agriculture, or ranching, is kind of a local zoning decision in part, and in part it's a federal decision, because Utah is 2/3 controlled by the federal government, and a lot of those ranching land, grazing and those kinds of things are happening on federal lands, and so there's a limited amount that policymakers at the state level even can do, just because of the land dynamic, but also that they would probably try to do, because even if you're talking about land that's not federal controlled, it's often left to counties and cities to make those decisions. And that is where I'm really unfamiliar with what they're doing in terms of the question you're asking, so I wish I could say more than that.
Well, we're at time. All good questions. Thank you all for weighing in, and thanks for being here. And just want to mention this is the last of the Sutherland Congressional Series for this year. So thanks to all of you for attending, and thanks, of course, to our online audience for participating. On the screens here, you'll see a QR code for a survey. We encourage you all to please fill out that survey. Let us know how you liked this event. If there were any other of these events in this series that you attended, we welcome that feedback. We always like to continuously improve these events. And also big thanks to the Hinckley Institute and the University of Utah for being our venue host and providing this wonderful space for all of you to hear from your elected officials and have some great conversations. So please join me in thanking our policy panel. Thanks very much.